Acting Speaker, I am privileged to rise to speak on the Workplace Manslaughter and Other Matters Bill 2019. This legislation is imperative and it is the right thing to do. The Andrews Labor government announced in May last year that if re-elected, it would make workplace manslaughter an offence in Victoria. I was proud to campaign on this important policy in my electorate and proud that Victoria voted in such numbers for this legislation to become a reality. I would like to give my heartfelt thanks to the Premier and the Attorney-General for their complete commitment to this legislation. This legislation delivers on that commitment by creating a new criminal offence of workplace manslaughter in the OH&S Act of 2004, which will send a strong message that putting people's lives at risk in the workplace will not be tolerated. Ballarat knows too well the devastating impact of workplace deaths on families and indeed on the whole community. I would also like to thank the member for Wendouree for her moving contribution. Like her, I have spent time with the families of Jack Brownlee and Charlie Hawkins. I have heard them tell their terrible story again and again. This legislation will not bring back their loved ones and it will not even have a bearing on their cases. But nonetheless, they have worked tirelessly. They have worked courageously to bring this legislation to this House and to make sure that no one else suffers their pain and frustration at the lack of accountability for workplace fatalities. For me, the time for tears is over and it is time to make this law. Up to 30 people are killed at work in Victoria every year, and that is 30 deaths too many. So far this year, there have been 20 workplace deaths. Many of those deaths have been young people just starting their working lives. Jack Brownlee was only a little older than my own son. And when I speak with Janine Brownlee, the pain of a grieving mother is etched in her eyes. The Brownlees and Lana Cormie have borne that pain and yet continued to work for all of us to make these important legislative changes. Through their own grief, they have worked tirelessly to get this legislation right. Both families were a part of the Workplace Fatalities and Serious Incidents Reference Group, which met between May and October this year. This reference group provided essential feedback on the development of the proposed laws and advocated for additional reforms to better support families following a workplace fatality. The insight of those families is crucial. To hear Lana describe the way in which she found out about Charlie's death is gut-wrenching. The lost moments for Dave and Janine when they could have been with their son are a terrible, terrible indictment on the systems and processes involved with a workplace fatality. So another incredibly important aspect of this legislation is the establishment of a Workplace Incidents Consultative Committee. This committee will be the first of its kind in Victoria and will ensure that government receives direct advice from those impacted by a workplace fatality. It has an important role in providing a place for the continued involvement of affected families in the development of the support and process outside the scope of the bill. This committee will provide very real ways that we can address the terrible paths that families have to follow. Those on the other side seem to think that the reference group have not done enough work and would see this legislation delayed. In April, I stood with the Brownlees outside the Victorian Trades Hall on Workers' Memorial Day. In an extraordinary tribute, workers from the hall placed a pair of working boots on a stool, one by one, representing every workplace death in that previous year. Every moment of delay in this legislation risks another pair of boots. It risks another broken-hearted family. When I first met with Lana and the Brownlees, I could feel their urgency to get this legislation done. We talked about setting up the reference group, we talked about how important it was to get it right, and they put aside their own need for urgent action to make sure that we got it right. This legislation has been crafted by the hands of those it affects. It has been shaped by the unions that represent all working people, and it has been drafted by a government that at its very core holds the protection of all working people dear. This legislation must not be delayed. We need to take action in a way that stops any employer and any company from thinking that lives lost can ever be a cost of doing business. Currently, the average penalty applied to a business for a workplace fatality sits at about $300,000 to $400,000, and this must change. The terrible impact of the loss of life cannot be measured in dollars. It is far-reaching and never-ending. Under the current state of the law in Victoria and the OH&S Act, the most serious health and safety breach is captured by Section 32. The member for Kew seems to believe that these current rules are strong enough, and yet we acknowledge the more than 20 deaths in the last year. For all of those workplace deaths, only three companies have been prosecuted under Section 32 since 2005. Prior to this bill, most workplace fatalities were prosecuted by reference to Section 26 of the OH&S, which refers to the failure to provide a safe working environment. It was under Section 26 that Charlie and Jack's employer were prosecuted. Though no prosecution will ever heal the loss felt by Lana and the Brownleys, at the very least they should have the comfort of knowing that someone has been held accountable for that loss. This bill makes clear that employers will be held to account for the decisions they make when those decisions lead to a loss of life. At its core, this bill is about people going to work and coming home at the end of the day. This bill will insert into the OH&S Act a new offence of workplace manslaughter that has associated with it a number of significant penalties. For individuals, the bill imposes a maximum penalty of 20 years imprisonment for the proposed offence in line with this government's election commitment. For a body corporate, the maximum penalty will be approximately $16.5 million. Where the conduct can be attributed, that means traced back to an officer, they will be liable to a maximum penalty of approximately $1.65 million. We will work with employers to implement the changes needed to get ready for these laws, but there is not one new obligation that we are implementing for employers as a result of this bill. All that employers need to do, that they have ever needed to do, is to provide a workplace that is safe. If employers don't do that, if they fall short of the standard of care that would have been taken by a reasonable person and that conduct led to a high risk of death or serious injury, then they need to be held accountable for that. There should be no doubt in the mind of any member of this House or any member of the community that the Andrews Labor government takes workplace safety seriously, and this bill is a way to hold those people accountable. On the night of the election last November, I spoke to Janine Brownlee and I made her a promise. I promised her from one mother to another that I would do everything in my power to make sure that this legislation became a reality. For me, the passage of this legislation will be the most important achievement of this government in its first year. Though it will never change the agony of their loss, it will be a lasting testament to Lana, Janine and Dave's courage and determination. I thank them for all their work in bringing this issue to the fore, in shaping this legislation through the reference committee and for telling their story. From now on, they will know that employers will be held accountable. I wish this bill a safe and speedy passage through the House.